The idea of a bio is to boast on some level. It's to be factual on some level. It's a mini resume.
How do I frame myself to this person who doesn't seem to know that he knows people I know, right? That doesn't seem to know my position or who I am.
Walking away from a conversation going, why did I say that, right? And I used to beat myself up about that, and I don't anymore. And the reason is because I am who I am, and I don't really give a shit anymore.
Welcome to another session of Inside Outlooks, where we know that personal growth is an inside job. How we think, what we think, why we think it, or what determines our level of success and happiness. It's time to take a look inside to change the world around us.
I don't think you have imposter syndrome, do you? When it comes to that?
Occasionally, on occasion, for sure. Yeah. Mostly because Oh, next.
Impersonating yourself?
A little bit of imposter syndrome and a little bit of like, what is my identity? Like, what do I hold my identity in? Because also, like, you very quickly we're like, oh, we'll talk about like your team leader role. So it's like, okay, well, is that what I am? Like, is that my or is that my value? Right? Because I'm also a business owner, and I'm also a real estate investor, and I'm also a party thrower.
Well, I think the question becomes, what's the bio for, right? Without getting too prescription on it, because I've had issues with this too, thinking like, I feel like I'm boasting, but the idea of a bio is to boast on some level. It's to be factual on some level. It's a mini resume.
Mm-hmm.
I think Matt nailed my long bio, not the short one. The short one is perfect for the podcast. He nailed my long bio in a sense that that's the bio I've been wanting for years. I just kept missing the mark. Now, it was good enough for what it was for. Like, someone asked for a bio and I would give it. Right? It was good enough, but it always fell flat in my head when I read it. So I think, to Matt's point, it helps to take stock of who you are. It's about awareness and mindfulness, and also being vulnerable.
And how you want to be perceived in the world. Because I think that we're all egomaniacs, right? Like, everyone wants to be perceived in a certain way, whether they willingly like acknowledge and accept that, or it's just a subconscious kind of thing. And sometimes it like shows up in your life in this like, oh, when you're deciding like what to wear for a big event, right? You're thinking about how you want to be perceived at that event, right? In that moment, or you're writing a bio for something. But like on a more subconscious level, every single day, every time you get dressed, every time you greet someone, all of those things are how you're being perceived in the world.
Just in your example of getting dressed up for an event, that's hyper aware how you want to be perceived and what your wardrobe says about you. So you're thinking about it, right? And to an extent, you're being vulnerable. However, you're kind of being vulnerable in a vacuum inside your head, because the question becomes, are you trying to be something you're not, or are you comfortable with who you are, and your dress is going to complement that or accentuate that, right? As opposed to being someone you're not, and
being someone you think others want you to be.
Yes, right? Which it works so much better when when you dress for the event, whether it's formal or casual, but you do it in such a way that your personality comes out. The same thing with same thing with the bio. I was on a call. This occurs to me. I don't know why. I'm just going to say it. I was on a call today before you guys. That was a sales call. They were selling me on why Realty Solutions should advertise in, of all things, what's your magazine?
Real Producers.
That's it. Why I should advertise in Real Producers in this area. And by the way, I think I want to connect you with this guy. Cool. That owns the South Jersey franchise. So he doesn't know me. He's actually very young. He's new to the industry. He is just an entrepreneur. So he's new to everything. So he's been doing it for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And he's already sold to all the people that I know, right? Colleagues, some are friends, some are business partners.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't necessarily know that.
Right.
And I was struggling with, do I need him to know that? Is that my ego that I want to name drop? So I held off from the most part, but there was a couple weak moments where I couldn't hold that. I couldn't hold it in. And I started to pontificate about who I knew and why. But I'm not sure if it was like my fear is that it was disingenuous. I'm not sure that it truly was, because my intention was to bring it back so that he could see what kind of businessman I was and how the business relates to, the 500 agents that he's selling to in this area. So for me, I sometimes feel a little bit shame and guilt, although my ego won't stop it, to name drop. I don't know why that occurred to me when I heard you talking about the topic.
No, that's an interesting perspective, because I've done that, or I don't know if you guys have, where you've left a conversation with someone and you think, why did I say that? why did I do that? Right? Like, why? I used to get, then you get frustrated and you're like, oh, now I feel like icky about it. But I think that there's something positive about that reflection, because that's telling you that you're actually taking a look at your ego. And like you said, you went into that meeting, it sounds like, consciously, maybe not trying to suppress, but just to be aware, right, of what you were doing. Like, if it was,
well, maybe I was going to it from a suppression standpoint, and that's why it felt so hard to keep it in, right? So maybe I approached it from that standpoint of a negative. So thinking it as a negative, I shouldn't do this. And then I bottled it up so much that it actually was the right thing to do in the whole setting, because the conversation after an hour ended up being from him saying, and I'm pretty sure it was genuine, this was one of the most refreshing calls that I've had with people in the industry, because they just don't get advertising, marketing, networking, and promotions. That left me feeling like, well, I'm glad I did get deeper into the conversation and who I know and why I know them. I don't know. That could just be a total masturbation rationalization.
No, I don't think that it is, because, well, let's look at it this way. When you think of like people that people like, a term they use a lot of times is like they're down to earth, or like they're always themselves, right? So it sounds like you, instead of like suppressing that, you just decided to be yourself, and that's why he knew that it came off as genuine. But okay, it comes back to, let's talk about identity. You were meeting someone who was a stranger, right, to you, and the question was like, how do I frame myself to this person who doesn't seem to know that he knows people I know, right? That doesn't seem to know my position or who I am.
Yeah. So a side of it is ego, and another side of it is, I think my real intention, if you boil it down, was to maximize the 45 minutes to 50 minutes I spent with him, because I wanted as much information as I possibly could, so that he knew who I was, and give information, so that if I chose to spend money with the magazine, I had more of a partner than just a sales rep. Again, maybe that's a rationalization.
I checked out for a minute because I was hyper focused on trying to find your bio, but I remembered that we recorded that call, right? So I can get it from the call. Anyway, sorry, it's bothering me because I found another bio that I did write for you a while back, because you asked me to do that, and I was like, oh, that.
You've done it twice.
Anyway, but here's what I will say, because Daryn and I both know we're very much alike, and so I'm gonna go back to the beginning of this conversation about walking away from a conversation going, why did I say that, right? Like, and I used to beat myself up about that, and I don't anymore. And the reason is because I am who I am, and I don't really give a shit anymore, right? And it used to be, well, what are they going to think of me? Well, I don't really care, because I am who I am. I'm not going to change who I am for them. So I'm okay being who I am and walking away from it that way. And I'm just an open book, and I know that. And I lived with somebody for a lot of years who, anytime I would share stuff, or I would come home and I would say, I was talking to someone, you really should be more careful. Like, didn't trust, right? That you can't trust people, right? Well, I trust people until they prove me wrong. I'm the opposite, right? I'm not going to go and worry about it. So I just am who I am, and I'm open. Do I think that always serves me? No, because I say yes too much, right? But anyway.
You say yes too much.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I say no to people. If they need something, I say, sure, I can do that, right? Whether I really think I can or not, right? It's just me. I'm getting better at that too. But, but I mean, that's coming from because we want to be liked, right? I mean, it's just part of our natural behavioral style for Daryn, right?
Yeah, it's a security thing. And I think the statement, I don't really give a shit anymore, we appreciate that. However, from a defining what that really means what I'm hearing from you is I give a shit more about what I think of myself and to be more aware of being as much 100% me as I can be in every situation. But then, to Daryn's point, every situation does demand possibly a different version, not different version of us, but a different role of us. We're still the same person, but if you're going to go to that large scale formal event, you're going to be dressed on that behavior. If you're going to go to a barbecue, you're going to be dressed in on that behavior. The same thing with a sales call. You're the salesperson or you're being sold.
It's right? Very similar to what you and I were talking about last week around vulnerability, right? It's good to be vulnerable because people see you as human, like whatever. But in certain situations, you can't go up and, if you're a leader and you're leading a talk on, I don't know, whatever, self-confidence or whatever, you can't go up there and throw yourself under the bus about how you lack self-confidence so much, right? Like, or whatever. So you can be authentic, but yeah, it's got to be, you got to dress your mind, your mindset, your demeanor to the client, to the person, to the situation, to the whatever, right? Just like I wouldn't wear an Armani suit to go show well, I can't even find a $200,000 property now, but a mobile home out in Richmond, right? And I wouldn't go in flip-flops and a t-shirt to show a $3 million property on the island. I wouldn't show up at a barbecue with Matt, who's all business, or Matt, who's all whatever, and I wouldn't show up at a business meeting talking about, I don't know, Disney World.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, this brings to mind a favorite quote. Who here is a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race?
I am.
No. You are. Yes, Dave. Excellent.
What is it?
I would watch it with Gray.
Of course. An excellent dad. Okay. RuPaul is maybe like the most iconic drag queen of our time, right?
That's what I missed.
And there's a quote that I feel like is relevant to this conversation. He says, "We're born naked. Everything else is drag." Everything that we do is all a costume, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what we're talking about. So because if everything's a costume, right? But sometimes that costume feels inauthentic, or it feels exaggerated, or it feels not real. If that is true, and I'm a believer, I think that statement is true. What's the differentiator? What's the difference between you're showing up differently in all these situations, but you're still yourself?
Yeah. The difference is, so to go back to the original point of this is, Daryn, do your fucking bio. I think we forget what bio means. It's a biography of Daryn. So literally, if we were going to write a biography of Daryn, we wouldn't just focus on Keller Williams. We wouldn't just focus on your family. We wouldn't just focus on your dating relationships. We wouldn't just focus on you being an entrepreneur investor. We'd focus on it all.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to a business bio, we're doing the same thing. We have to define what event are we going to, and what costume are we going to put on that makes sense to tell everybody who we truly are for that event. Right? It reminds me, as I'm talking, of years ago, 18 years ago, selling coaching to real estate agents. I could be myself, but I could not be the life coach mindset version of a coach. I had to put the clothes on of accountability and productivity, and I will help you make more money. It was authentic in a sense that it was the role I was playing and I was being myself, but I couldn't be that other version of it. They ended up benefiting because of knowing me through that role. Right? So where do you go? So it's like that imposter syndrome. where do you go on a daily basis when you're in these different roles? And where's that imposter syndrome come from? I think it comes a little bit maybe from what Matt said about being happy and secure, right? If people are happy with me, then I'm secure. The imposter syndrome is less.
Mm-hmm. And this is also to Matt's point, and it's, or maybe you said this, Dave, am I happy with me? Right? And that's two different, I think that's probably two different levels almost of security. Right? You can feel pretty secure when everyone else tells you that you're great and everything's great.
Well, yeah, I think that's where to me, and this is me personally, right? That's where the imposter syndrome comes in more, is my judging myself or my evaluating myself, right? Like if I'm giving myself on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I doing? Right? That's where the imposter syndrome comes in to me sometimes, right? Like I may have had good numbers at KW and be recruiting and whatever, but yet I didn't feel like I was doing a good job, right? And I was the only one telling me that. I was thinking other people were thinking that, but nobody was telling me that. It was just me. That's where that, judgment of ourselves, I think, comes in and creates a lot of the imposter syndrome part of things.
Well, the solution to that is simple but hard. The solution to that, and it was for you, speaking as your coach at the time, the solution to that was you knowing what your value system was and what was higher on your value system. And if we looked at approval of others, if you're singing opera on stage and you're fucking killing it and they don't stand up and clap and they know you're killing it, you don't get that approval of others. There's an action that happens, right? If they stood up and clapped, then you're getting, even though you did a fucking killer job, both ways. If they don't clap or if they do clap, the approval of others comes into what you value to give you the feedback that you need, and be vulnerable about owning that value.
Yeah.
I think a huge part of this is understanding the scoreboard for you in your life. And let me explain that, because I'll tell you this story. When I was in high school, I had a teacher who he was teaching a business law class for us in high school, which sounds weird, but it was a fun class. And I remember he was called me up after a test and was like, "You did great on this." I was like, "Thanks." It was some short answer questions. And he goes, "You know what you're good at, Daryn? You just know exactly what we want to hear and you just feed it right back to us." He's like, you know the game. You know how to play the game." And I laughed and I was like, "Haha, yeah, I do." And then I went home and I was like, "Oh my God, what a terrifying thing to tell someone." But I knew very clearly what the scoreboard was. What did it look like to win? What was success? And so I was able to do it. And I think that from a very young age, we're taught well, if you make your bed, your mom says, "Good job, I'm proud of you, you're a great kid," right? And then so you do it because you know what the scoreboard is. And then everyone I think reaches a point where the scoreboard becomes a little bit unclear.
Oh yeah.
And it becomes your responsibility to make your own scoreboard. And most people don't have someone helping them with that. Most people don't have someone who's like, "What does success actually look like for you, Matt Walley? What does it look like, Dave?" Because for so much of your life, you're told, "Here's the next step. Here's what you have to do to win." And then you can decide okay, am I going to do that? Am I going to do what everyone says, "Good job. This is how I win." So for Matt, the question in that moment, he's singing. The question is what is doing a good job? Is it singing to the best of my ability? Or is it the standing ovation?
Right. And it's changed, right? Because back then it was the response, not because I wanted the attention, but because that was my feedback, right?
Yeah.
Whereas now and I wish I knew this then, it's, even when I look at auditions back then, if I've gone into auditions and thought, I'm going to do the best I can do and I'm going to enjoy this because this is what I love to do, instead of I'm going to go in and try and impress these people and do something that's going to make them happy, I would have had better auditions, right? Yeah. And so that changes as we age. And I mean, that's a music analogy, right? A musician's analogy, but I think the same is true. That's kind of my I don't give a shit right, what people think anymore. And it's not that I don't give a shit what people think, but what I mean is I'm going to be me. And if they don't like it, I'll deal with it. I'm okay with that, right? But you just hit on something there, and we had this conversation, I don't know, sometime when we were having our dinners when the pandemic started. I think about you and me being chameleons. Mm-hmm. Remember that? We created some, we were going to get shirts. I don't remember what it was. It was something with chameleons. But anyway, because we adapt to the people, right? In the sense that we can be what they want us to be, what they want to hear. And that's where we lose our identity. Who are we really, right? Because I can be in any situation. I can hang out with people on yachts and driving, Maybachs, or I can hang out with people drinking Coors Light in their backyard with four-wheelers, right? It doesn't matter. I can adapt to all of that. But if we're always, I think what we missed back then maybe is that we're always who we are in those moments. We're doing it for them, but we don't necessarily need to lose sight of who we are.
Yeah, well, the chameleon, does the chameleon forget it's a lizard when it's changing colors or its environment? No, it's doing it from a safety. We'll just use the word safety issue, right?
Sure.
It's natural to them. So having it be
blending in.
Well, right. And it's we have all had this experience, and we've kind of tailored our professional experience to be in this, to be of service to us. The more we blend in, the more successful we are, and not blend into the background, but blend into our environment. Just like my example here, talking to a salesperson, I blended in with him and started speaking his language because I wanted something out of it that was going to benefit both of us. I saw his scoreboard, right? So the idea that scoreboard really makes sense, because now with that example of, doing your chores or making your bed for your mother, that's something, or for your father, that's something that's dictated, and you can draw a conclusion, effort and reward. Now, as an adult, right, and as our lives get more complicated and moving one career to another, singing to team leader, we have to articulate and understand, being our own advocate to make that scoreboard. You hadn't at the time figured out what the scoreboard was. You hadn't figured out what everyone standing up clapping would look like as a team leader. And once you did that, which at that point is really asking for feedback, right? Because it's not paid tickets sitting in a seat at the end, everybody claps. It's you're living that, and you have to ask for feedback at certain points. Hey, boss, am I doing well? Hey, team, am I doing well? And get that feedback so that you get in your case, standing ovation, or a boo or two.
Never. So
I don't know why you brought up a boo, but very interesting. Sorry. So I'm writing down thoughts, because you know me, my thoughts come and they go. So but I think it all ties together. The RuPaul thing, right? We're all born naked. If you look at the difference between how we as Americans respond to nudity and things versus how Europeans respond to nudity, it's night and day. Because that's the way they're raised. They don't grow up in this, you gotta don't look at that. Don't, like, their kids see nudity, whatever. Right? They don't make it a big deal, so it's not a big deal. Whereas here we make it a big deal, so it becomes a big deal. And that to me is an example of your house and your parents making the bed, right? That's a different version of that, right? You grow up now with that as this example. And I think there's probably different times in our life, but to me, the biggest time that we challenge those things is what's referred to as midlife crisis. We wake up one day and we go, wait a minute, is this what I believe, or is this what I was told I should believe?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the midlife crisis. It's like, if I want to buy a Corvette, I'll go buy a freaking Corvette. Who's going to tell me I can't, or whatever it is, right? I mean, yeah, part of it's probably to make us feel younger or whatever, but I think it's just this moment of realizing that I have been living somebody else's values or somebody else's whatever for so long, and I don't want to do that anymore, right?
And I believe wholeheartedly that the pandemic it really sped up a lot of people's midlife crises. I know people who are, I'm in my 20s. I have friends who are younger than me who changed jobs, moved, ended relationships, got married, had babies, because it was a point in our lives where we said, like, okay, wait a second, I don't have forever. What am I living? Like, whose life am I living?
Well, it also put some things in there in Magnascope, right? I mean, it put, like, think about relationships. All of a sudden now you're stuck at home with your spouse for the next, 2 years, and you have to see them every day. You're not going off to work to get that break, right? It also sped up divorces, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might sped up the other side of that too, with relationships where people came together quicker because they wanted connection so bad. Like, it really did put some things into a time warp. The question is, what did it slow down? Anything? I mean, I don't know, I never thought about it, but did it slow anything down other than restaurant business and things like that? Because I think it did. It sped up a lot of stuff. It made people decide what's important, right? Or what we didn't want.
If I had to grab something, I think it slowed down our growth to patience as a society, at least from a Western culture aspect, talking about, here, it slowed down our ability to access patience more.
Or, well, it also forced us to be a little patient too, which could have an adverse effect because it becomes a pressure cooker, right? If you're forced.
Well, that's I wouldn't I personally wouldn't categorize that as patience as much as, forced quiet time or whatever it might be. So it was unnatural. But I think that's a stretch, because I don't even think you have to get something that might be it for me. But your point's true. I mean, it has hastened a lot of things. Midlife crisis of the pandemic, from an economic or a enterprise level, is there's a midlife crisis over wages and career path. To your point, younger people are doing something uncommon to older people and just quitting and moving on. Older people are doing something uncommon that they wouldn't have thought of before, which is quitting and moving on. I have an issue hiring 2 staff members, 2 positions that we found great matches, and they wanted $20,000 more than what the range was. And we kept getting hit by that. And then I started doing more research and more thought process on it and becoming more aware of, like, holy shit, I'm behind. I don't want to spend 20 grand more, but that is going to be the loss of my business. I've got to get up with the times. And to your point, Matt, like, the times is only 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
people would have been happy to take $50,000. They want 70 now.
Yeah.
Is that wrong? No, it's not wrong. It's just different.
And I'll tell you what, and I mean, we've seen the real estate industry obviously do what it's doing, and we've seen the car industry doing what it's doing, right? I just talked to my attorney here who bought a Ford Raptor, because he was driving by a dealership and he got a pop-up on his Facebook and he couldn't believe the price, so he just decided to stop, and they were like, no, this is wrong. But then they saw that it was a Ford advertisement, and they're like, well, because they advertised it, we got to give it to you for this. So he got it for like 60 grand instead of 70 grand or something. Yeah, they have already called and offered him like 78 grand or something to buy it back, right? But anyway, the other thing is everything is starting to do that. If you don't know it already, everything is starting to go up. We, just a easy personal example, we've been stopping at a furniture store way too often. But the same furniture store, right? And Heather's looking at this lamp, and she really liked the lamp. And I was like, get the lamp if you want to get the lamp. It's $700, right? Well, of course, when she decided we were going to go get it, they sold it. Well, they have 2 more on order, but guess how much they're going to be?
$800.
Lamp, $1,000, because of the supply and the demand and the difficulty in getting stuff. Things are starting to, and Pottery Barn we were in this past weekend doesn't have prices on a lot of stuff. And when asked why, they said because prices are changing constantly right now, and they're going up and up and up and up and up. And so all the stuff that's going on in the world, we're going to start seeing that, which is going to continue to separate the haves from the have-nots, which is going to continue to probably spark the polarization in this country and everything else, which is why the Fed's raising interest rates, right, to try and slow that down a little bit. But anyway, it's just interesting. I mean, it's a totally different subject, but it's
no, it's not. If you continue, it will be. I'll do Daryn's job to bring it back. Imposter syndrome on the lamp and the bio for the lamp. The biography of the lamp doesn't change, right? It's a decorative utilitarian piece, right? Materialistic piece. So the biography of that lamp doesn't change. The bio for the lamp changed when Heather wanted it to when it was sold, and now they're getting new ones, right? So the demand for it just changed the bio,
Yeah.
right? Because the audience is different. So now we've got to have a different story for the lamp. That's the same fucking lamp, right? And it's not to say that it's not worth $1,000 or $700 or $2. It's the drag that the bio has. It's the costume that bio just took. So if you're the lamp, you could have imposter syndrome, because am I worth the amount of materials that it takes to make the lamp, which is probably somewhere around $100, or am I worth 700 and then the next day 1,000? The answer is yes to all of them.
To all of the above. And Dave, you brought up another interesting point that I want to tie back together, because you said generationally, like there are some differences right now if we're looking at the job market and like what's happening. I think that I see in real time younger people, yes, they're asking for more money, right, than ever before, because we're living in times of crazy inflation. And I think a generation who has a more inherent understanding of their value, or they're less afraid to ask for it, right? And some other generations really are resisting that, because the answer is, well, I never would have asked for that. I didn't when I was, when I was your age, or even presently, I think is the real answer. Well, I wouldn't turn down a job because, of a $10,000 pay difference. I would be glad to have a job and glad for the opportunity. And it's interesting to see that kind of like, I don't want to say animosity, but I think that there's something jarring, can be, if you feel like you don't know your identity, or you have some maybe underlying imposter syndrome, or you don't feel fully comfortable in your value. Seeing someone else who knows their value and is willing to like ask for it can really stir something up.
So that's funny. I wrote down something I've been reading, and I think I've told you guys about this. It's the next book after The Coaching Habit, called The Advice Monster. The way to reset a relationship or a conversation from a coaching perspective is to follow a path of four. And it's tribe, try to connect, expectations, reevaluate what someone's expectations are in the conversation, ranking, and autonomy. You just talked about ranking, right? So if I'm unsure what my ranking is with you, to your point, I'm 55, you're how old?
29.
29. Why are you so fucking entitled? Because I didn't have what you had, right? That's a ranking issue where now we're at odds with each other. The idea there is to connect the relationship and get the ranking, so that if I'm controlling the conversation, get the ranking to be more equal, so that everyone feels, and Matt said this before, safe or happy in the conversation, right? There's your chameleon aspect, right? Whether it's you're controlling it or I'm controlling it. If I want to get the ranking better for the two of us, I'm going to be a chameleon and identify with you to get your ranking to go higher or lower to meet mine.
Matching energies is a phrase I heard this week that someone said to me. He was like, I think it was a first meeting with someone. It was a virtual Zoom, and he was like, I can tell we're going to work well together because we can both match energies.
Yeah.
It's a different frame of thinking of it. Matching energies is different than chameleoning myself to just be whoever someone expects me to be. Matching energies comes with it's a conscious decision. It's
an awareness and a mindfulness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, have you met somebody in your life who you just knew from the moment you met them that you were friends? Like, right? You just easy, right? Like, I still remember this guy when I moved to Hilton Head and I was schlepping golf bags on the golf course, right? I was working the bag drop, and there's this Asian guy that was there, and there was just something about, we just became friends. Like, we didn't think about it, we didn't whatever, right? There were like 8 other guys that worked there that I didn't become friends with, right? But there was just, and I think that's a matching energy too, right? I think there's just, we're on the same frequency, or we're something with people sometimes, right? And that's where you're authentic, they're authentic. You don't have to be something, you don't have to put on drag, right? to match their energy.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas in the sales example of Dave, you had to match their energy in a sense of putting that coaching, life coaching, whatever, mindset coaching energy aside and matching the sales coaching energy, right? So,
yeah.
and
some people too are going to be your friend no matter which drag you put on that day, right? Like a real, someone that you really connect with. Yeah. So I think that we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about a lot of things. We talked about I think we bring it all back to identity and imposter syndrome, and knowing how do you figure out who you are, what your scoreboard is, right? And what makes sense to you. And one thing I wanted to bring it back to, Matt kind of said he reached a point where he doesn't give a shit, right? What people think about him. And that's interesting. Like you hear people say like, well, you reach an age and you quit caring, or something happens to you and you quit caring. I actually think that might be an incorrect description, because I think that those people care deeply about the way they show up for themselves and the people that matter to them. I don't think you reached a point where you quit caring. I think you just changed what you cared about.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think in my case, and I mean, if I'm being honest, I still care, right, to a certain extent. It's
we know you do,
but I'm
you're a caring guy.
I'm not trying to accumulate people, right? If the right people show up and like who I am and the quirkiness of me and whatever, great. But if they don't, I'm okay with that too. Or I'm not out looking to attract everybody, right? I'm not trying to please everybody. I'm not trying to whatever. I just know that right people will appreciate me for who I am, and I'm happy with that, right? It's not that I don't give a shit. It's just, I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, okay. You're my scoreboard right now, so
Standing ovation. Should we rise? No, I think that's a good conversation, and I think that's probably another conversation we can dive into, is how do you determine like who you want to attract, and who are the people that you actually do want to be around, and whose opinion matters to you, because that's something that both of you have taught me, both like explicitly and through the example of your lives. And I know part of it is, everyone says, comes with time, but clearly you guys have both been intentional about who's in your circle, like who's in your world. And a lot of people talk about that, like, you're the sum of the 5 people around you. And I actually have a great coach who referred to it as a board of directors. And I love that. I love that thought, Dave, that came from you. But I think that's another great conversation, is how do you form that board of directors? How do you decide who's part of your life? And how do you filter what they share with you?
That is another episode of Inside Outlooks.
It is. It's a great, because I'm thinking of, if you think of like you have, I always think KW teaches that, or used to teach it anyway. That you have somebody that's your mentor in the financial world. You have somebody that's your mentor in the career world. You have somebody that's your mentor in the spiritual world, in the physical world, and the whatever, right? And so each of those people are gonna be different people, right? Because that's a different aspect of your life, just like the different places you show up and you dress differently for, and you act differently for, right? We all have different facets of our lives. So it doesn't mean we're different with any of those. We're still us, but it's a different facet of our life, just like the barbecue is a different facet than the business meeting and the this and the that. So
I think that how-tos is really an interesting point, and that's what I wanted to dovetail into what you said, Daryn, was like, bring it back to the beginning of the conversation, imposter syndrome. Did any of this conversation help with 2 things? Not so much how do I write my bio, is why am I not writing my bio? Then what's the action to actually get the bio done, right? The question is, what's the real challenge here?
Yeah. It helped with both of those things, because the why was clearly the existential crisis.
Right.
And a little bit of just wanting to sound super cool. Like I need to make sure that this bio is the coolest. And honestly, I don't know why I'm stressed about it. I write bios like weekly on my dating app. Like I change it all the time. And so I'm like always A/B testing. And I will tell you guys, since we've been sitting here, I actually did write my bio, and it's just a one-liner. It's Daryn Vuzcelik is both a bad bitch and a good person. So if you just want to blast that out, that's it.
See, you need to look over your left shoulder. Look over your left shoulder. Be bold, and then Dave, look over your right shoulder because we've got solutions. No, think about writing your bio. Don't take yourself out of being Daryn, and write your bio like Daryn is your friend and you know who Daryn is and what she does, and write it like you're writing it for someone else. And don't be bashful about it, because the only people who are going to see the first draft of this are me and Dave, and I'm going to tweak it and make it sing anyway, right? So just be bold.
And that statement, that last bio statement, is probably what makes it to the audio bio, right? Because that's the flavor of our venue and who we are in the venue, right? It's the event. The bio matches the event.
Yes. Well, you're telling me we all have to have curse words. That's what you're saying.
Thanks for listening, and remember, your outside world is an inside job. See you next time. Hey, can we get 2 more over here? Make them double.